Okay, the recording has started, and this is the August 3rd, 2020 Crossplane community meeting. We will start with our milestone checkup. So 0.13, we chose to skip the release of the main Crossplane repo, at least for the mid-monthly release for July. So 0.13 did not go out in July. There wasn't really a lot of any code changes to the main repo. It was mostly in providers and documentation and other stuff. But we will be planning on doing 0.13 for, I guess, mid-month release in August. The providers did go out last week, or maybe it was actually the week before that, but since the last community meeting, we did a whole round of releases for all the providers, like AWS and Alibaba and such. We could bring up the board here for where we're tracking things at the Crossplane organization level, but then the main feature areas are down below further that we can dive into more details on. But let me clear some things off my screen here. They're in the way. So yeah, in this board view here, Dan or Phil or anybody, are there any issues in here that we'd want to talk about or bring up that are not already captured in like the high level feature status update section?
There's one in provider AWS that I'll drop in there that I think would be good to talk about. I don't know if Krish is from Red Hat is working on it, but I don't know if he's on here, but I'd like to bring it up just to chat about it because it's a new pattern.
Is that like, does that fit in? Do you want the status about it, Dan, or do you want like a technical discussion of it in the technical, deep dive section of the meeting?
Yeah, I'll probably drop it in technical deep
Okay.
dive.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, so then let's move ahead then to the status for some of the major features. So as we mentioned earlier, Nick and Muvafik are off this week. So if anybody wants to jump in, maybe Phil, you're normally pretty on the pulse for everything. Do you have an update for us on the code generation or provider acceleration effort?
Yeah, I mean, so Casey's putting together the design doc for that, and that should be available for review here shortly. And then he's also working on kind of sketching out the open API for the providers, and we'll be probably floating that in the provider channel in Crossplane Slack to get some early feedback on that. So those are the two things that are in flight, and a little bit slower progress with summer vacations kind of intermixed, but yeah, that's still going on.
Cool, sounds good. I'm looking forward to seeing that document. All right, and then Crossplane agent updates. Is anyone aware that Muvafik is the point for that one, but anybody else can answer?
Yeah, I can answer that. There's a PR open that folks can look at if they like, that basically adds the initial functionality. It's doing the kind of basic pulling from the host cluster, and it also has the controllers for both running it in the local, which would be, when you're in the same cluster, as well as remote. So if folks are interested in that, they can take a pass on it. I've done one review, but need to go back through as well. But it's kind
of
just
this
the
PR
initial...
here, Dan? The one
Yep.
on my screen? Okay, excellent. I'll add a link then to the agenda doc. Thanks for taking a pass through that PR already, Dan.
Sure.
All right, and then package manager refactor, that is your ownership, Dan, so you can definitely take that one.
Yep. So there's been a couple different kind of concurrent efforts around this, but basically same, we're still working through it. I added some notes around kind of like direction. So the proposal right now stands with package being a single type. So whether it's like underlying different under the hood, you're still using the same CRD. There's a desire from a user experience perspective to be able to kind of distinguish the creation of these two different types of packages, one being a provider, which most people are familiar with, and the other being a configuration, which would be kind of composition types that you'd use to bootstrap a platform or add to your APIs basically that you expose. And there's a desire to kind of like separate those, even if they look very similar. One way to do that would be to have a single package type and then just have kind of like CLI tooling around that. And, you know, get a package, and you could say get configurations, but then have it filter packages by their type or something like that. But there's been more of a push to have them separate, potentially because of we may treat them in some different ways, et cetera. So anyway, that's kind of the broad proposal there, but they look like they have very similar schemas. There's still the idea of having revisions of each of those, so you can do update, rollback, et cetera. But that's probably the major change recently. I added some open questions as well that we're still kind of working through. Some of these are related more to package format. So that would be like opinionated directory structure and submodules versus dependencies, which that one's probably worth talking about a little bit. There's, you know, different tools, especially infrastructure provisioning tools, have the ability to either depend on other package types. So you can think of a configuration depending on a provider. You know, if it composes AWS resources, it's probably going to depend on provider AWS. But then configurations depending on other configurations could look more like having a submodule. So think of that like a subchart in Helm, which is obviously different than just having the thing installed separately. It bundles it all together. We don't know how much of a desire there is for folks to be able to do that, but we've been thinking about what that would look like. Likely, you could do it just by referencing that thing and then have it kind of compiled, since all of these are resulting in OCI images eventually anyway. But that's just one of the things we're working through. And then the last thing would be the installing arbitrary YAML. Basically, the reason why we would allow that would be so that you could actually create CRs, not just CRDs. And that includes infrastructure definitions, et cetera. So right now the proposal stands with you're able to create CRDs, infrastructure definitions, infrastructure publications, and compositions. If you could do arbitrary YAML, obviously you could, you know, create a definition of a database and then create an instance of it as well. And if we were to do that, we'd probably make the package manager configurable so that when you actually run the package manager, you could specify these are the types I'll allow you to make. So if you don't want people to be able to, you know, install arbitrary things that may create anything, then you'd want to restrict that when you run the package manager. So anyway, that's kind of a lot of stuff, but still trying to work through this model because we think it's pretty critical for the future of Crossplane. And as with last meeting, there's still ongoing development work happening in that repo in my GitHub org. And another thing that we're doing there is working on some developer tooling. So if you have thoughts about, you know, things you like to see, so specifically around like linting and building packages and that sort of thing, definitely feel free to reach out about that.
Nice, Dan. And did you have an ETA or some clear blockers that needs to be overcome before the design PR can be resolved?
The design PR is kind of it's not really like getting it merged wouldn't really mean anything at this point. So even if we kind of went ahead with it, I don't think we're clear on the full model we want to have. So there isn't clear blockers besides kind of some of those open questions, which I guess are not clear. So I don't have an ETA, but I would guess within the next 2 weeks, I'd like to have a direction settled on and begin work towards it before I do have that time off, as you mentioned. So I'd say next 2 weeks, maybe by the end of this week, we'd really like to push hard on this.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, and then you know, there's definitely work ongoing in the on Kubernetes runtime repo as well. Does anybody on the call want to catch us up on that as well, like Ryan or Harry or Andy or?
I can give some updates. We have a lot of new developments in the past 2 weeks on the Om repo. So we have at least like 7-8 pretty significant PRs going in, and We don't have any major development pending though, so it's in a relatively stable shape. Maybe we will give it another two weeks or a month, then we will try to release 0.1 version. We're now at 0.07 or 8, something like that. Yeah, by that time we hope that it can be at sort of like a alpha phase. People can really start to use it. Are there any questions in the community for OM runtime?
What are the plans for, I guess, finalizing the move of the app config controller out of core and into the OM runtime? Is that, it sounds like that's happening in 0.13, but do we have like a date for that?
Yeah, so I think that's more on our side, right? They already have the application configuration controller running. So right now the OEM Kubernetes runtime can run as is, right? But we just would need for whatever the 0.1 version, for instance, to run it alongside Crossplane that need to be moved out. So we need to have, you know, a way to install that and do so. So I think as soon as we're ready to have that Helm chart have like a 0.1 release or an alpha release, then we can go ahead and remove that application configuration controller from Crossplane and then bundle the Helm chart however we see fit. So maybe at that point the agent or something like that will be available to have kind of that Crossplane app Helm chart we've talked about.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. So yeah, let's coordinate so that let's try to land that 0.1 version with the same as Crossplane release timeline. So
Definitely.
we can have that separate out and have a release of Crossplane.
Cool. And then I guess we'd be looking at roughly maybe mid-month for the 0.13 if we're going on the monthly. Would that work well for you, Dan, like ahead of your wedding and stuff, or?
Yeah, I think we'll need to see how many changes we have, right? Because MoveOffic and Nick are out this whole week and they're primarily working on composition / we need them at least around to be able to make some progress there. So assuming that we can get some stuff in, I'd be happy to do that either right before or right after if that was necessary. That would be towards the later part of the month, but you know, not super late. So
Cool.
Yeah, I think that the timing wise works.
Yeah, and hopefully we can not necessarily like single resource bottleneck on Dan and his wedding for making any of those changes, like in the main Crossplane repo, like move off or Nick or somebody can pick those up if it times out, if it times well that way.
Definitely. Yeah.
Cool. All right, Brian, thank you for the updates as well. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Alrighty. Cool. So let's move ahead then to the community topics and questions section. So Dan, do you have anything to update us on for upcoming TBS episodes?
Sure. Yeah. So we didn't have one last week just because we had quite a few things going on, including lots of recording of Kubecon talks around there. But we have some cool episodes coming up. So as an early preview, I don't have a date for this one, but the CTO of SourceGraph is interested in coming on. So they basically recommend for production deployments deploying SourceGraph on Kubernetes. And that uses, I think, Postgres and Redis. So there's actually an issue open on the SourceGraph repo right now that I opened for allowing folks to be able to use Crossplane to use managed versions of Postgres and Redis. Right now, if you deploy, you can, like a lot of Helm charts and that sort of thing, you can supply credentials for a managed service, of a database that you'd like to use there. Or you can just run them in cluster. So obviously Crossplane would be nice there because you can create those resources rather than having to create them out of band and then bring your credentials and that sort of thing. So that one, we were working out with his schedule and also that work that would have to happen for that to go into effect. That one should be coming up pretty soon. Probably not the next one though. Next one, we are probably going to have another security focused one. Sasha from Upstream Kubernetes, he works at Suze, or however you say that. I never know. And I've been working with him on the last release cycle for adding setcomp operator, which is a Kubernetes add-on basically that allows you to put setcomp profiles on your Kubernetes nodes and then apply them to pod workloads. And so we're probably going to look at how to use that alongside Crossplane. So we'll see some underlying stuff like some of the syscalls that the Crossplane controllers make and that sort of thing, and applying appropriate profiles. So that should be a cool one as well, coming up next Thursday.
Nice. That sounds awesome, Dan. With the source graph one, that seems like another instance of a distributed application that like the existing Helm chart or whatever deployment of it into a Kubernetes cluster uses in-cluster services, but then giving them the option to use managed services instead, similar to Quay.io for the Red Hat and Krish have been working on. Are we seeing any patterns start to emerge there that would be able to like codify and factor out into like some library or some sort of reusable stuff, or is it too early for that still?
So I have noticed that it's super common to specifically have Postgres and Redis as the managed services required, and also S3 buckets. It seems to be extremely common, actually. But in general, those are things that they kind of come with Crossplane. There's not really a specific packaging up that would be reusable across them that comes immediately to mind. The one thing that could come up is, with composition, obviously we can define like abstractions across them. So we could publish kind of general abstractions. We've talked about this before with as claims get phased out, publishing with Crossplane optional kind of like default compositions that are like, you're probably going to want to use these. So, maybe at some point we have sort of like a Postgres Redis composition that we publish along with Crossplane, or we have a separate repo, right, where we have a collection of these that are really easy to install, that are kind of like getting started compositions. And then, folks like SourceGraph or Quay could easily use those if they fit their use case. But along with that, we also want to make it super easy for them to be able to customize their own and make their own abstract resources that are then satisfied by Crossplane primitives. So that's something that kind of harkens back to some of the developer tooling in my mind. I want that to be super easy for folks like SourceGraph to be able to add that functionality to their Helm chart or deployment manifest without having to do a ton of work or have a lot of specific domain knowledge.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Dan. It's I think that they're probably right that there's probably less patterns of reusability on the consumption side, maybe, and more about patterns of setting up the API with composition and stuff like that for the provisioning of the infrastructure resources. So that's interesting to keep an eye on that and see if there's whatever we can do to continue helping the community and ease adoption of Crossplane, especially as they're common use cases that people are getting real use out of. That sounds really cool. Sweet. Phil, you added composition to V1 Beta 1 back in the Milestone section. Did you have an update you wanted to share out loud with that, or just wanted to get it into the doc?
Yeah, just super briefly. So there has been some community feedback on a request for like external scripts or interpolation support for transforms in composition, for example, to bring in like the CIDR blocks that you might want. And so issue 1506 is where that conversation is going on. So if you have thoughts, definitely drop them in the comment thread there. That'd be great. There's also been a request for variable resources in a composition. And so we're kind of exploring some different options around that. In addition to even looking at bringing in like a CDK operator that would sit as a alternate form of composition, in addition to kind of the YAML-based composition that we have, that actually would be able to execute, JavaScript or whatever languages that are supported there, and effectively expand the contents of a composition to support those variable resources. But that's basically been open discussion. And then also the Helm provider for use in compositions has landed the design for that. So there was some discussions on the associated issue, and that's now been approved and landed. And I know that for many folks who wanted to, have like a cluster config for like EKS clusters and this kind of a thing, and then drop some post provisioning config on it with Helm, that they wanted to be able to do that inside of a composition, and the Helm providers moving forward to support that. So kind of exciting stuff there.
Yeah. One thing I just wanted to add to that is there's been, Hassan has been working on this, and he's actually made quite a bit of progress in the Crossplane contrib repo. And I'm going to grab the link there because I don't think it's in there, where that's where the provider Helm is right now. So if you actually go and take a look at that, he's got instructions for developing locally and doing all that kind of thing. So lots of progress being made there. And that's definitely something folks have been interested in. So I'll drop this in here real quick.
Cool.
Yeah, and when that's available, we should definitely make some blog post noise about that, and mention to people that functionality and like the use cases around it to get it out there. All right, cool. Thanks for that addition, filling in. Yeah, so then quick CNCF update. So the onboarding has been going on for after our acceptance into the sandbox project. So I think we just have a couple more things. We started signing and following up on the trademark transition paperwork and legal stuff. With legal stuff, that's going to take a little bit. It's not a quick, email agreement. It's a little bit more to it than that. And then the domain transfer as well. And then the Google Analytics as well, I think is something that's actually not on this list. But those are, I think, the few stragglers that we're trying to wrap up. But other than that, yeah, that's all I had on my list. Yeah, so other than that, things are going smoothly. Most everything's done there, and we are being treated as a real CNCF project with like a Kubecon maintainer booth and sessions for the North America one and stuff like that. So all is well there. Which brings me to Kubecon EU. So Friday was the due date for recording of your talks and submission of those. Did everyone get those in? Phil, you all got yours in. Dan, you got yours in. Me and Harry got ours in as well.
Yeah, totally. So super excited about the talks. They were great. It's always great to kind of collaborate, with everybody in the community. So yeah, I think we actually got like almost the very last recording slot too. So your advice to get in early on the scheduling paid off there.
So you use the platform one, like the like platform that they're hosting and stuff.
Prado or something like this.
Yeah. Was that smooth?
Yeah, I thought so.
Oh, cool.
Apart from the dump truck that rolled through right in the middle of the talk that they're editing out. Thank you.
That's one of my better takes for, I don't think it was the Crossplane and Ohm talk, but my Rook talk, one of the better takes I did, like the cathedral next door, like the bells and chimes went off, like it was like bong, bong, bong. I was like, oh, right in the middle of a good take.
Yeah. Yeah, we asked if we could re-record in general, and they're just like, you get the one shot, and it's like, right.
That's the pleasure of recording on your own, because you can do it as many times as you want. So nice.
Yeah,
okay, cool. Yeah, and Harry, thank you for the work in getting everything uploaded for our talk, man. We appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem.
Sweet. Okay, then we get a booth for being a CNCF project. We get a booth, and it is intended for maintainers to staff it. And so I had started a conversation on the Crossplane Slack with all of the 10 or so maintainers we have. So quick note on this is, it's not super, this is the first time they've done a virtual session, right? And there's definitely lots of loose ends and things that weren't fully finalized and smooth. So the timeline for this is actually really, really short. So we're supposed to be signed up and everything by Wednesday for people that want to, be at the virtual booth and talk to people coming by and answer questions and stuff like that. We're supposed to be signed up and registered by Wednesday, but actually, since they're having technical difficulties, we need to get people's names and email addresses in by end of day today. So if you have interest in staffing the Crossplane Cncf booth for any time period at all, it's not really a set schedule that like we need to fill out completely, but we do want to get some good coverage for it. But if you have any interest, please let me know so I can get your email and name in by end of day today to keep going with that process there. So they're not giving us a lot of time to figure this stuff out, and it's the platform as a whole has a lot of rough edges, but we'll do what we can to make it happen.
Yeah, thanks for coordinating that.
So I have a question about this. Is my first time. I've never been to any Kubecon. So for the staffing, what are the duties for staffing a booth?
Yeah, sure, Ryan. Yeah, and you know, this is the first virtual one they've done, so we're kind of making some assumptions here a little bit on my part. But basically, you know, they give us a virtual booth that we can hang out in for the entire day that you know, the 4 days of the conference, Monday through Thursday, and we can hang out there for the day. And I don't know how they're bringing traffic into the booth, but they basically have, you know, all attendees of the conference can come through and, you know, start conversations and, you know, ask about what Crossplane is, and, you know, we can talk about everything the project does and, you know, what we do with Ohm and all that sort of stuff. And so it's based, like, all from my understanding of the responsibilities of it, it's basically just being in conversations with people that are curious about Crossplane and representing Crossplane, being an ambassador of the project to the community.
Okay, I see. Thanks. I think in that sense, I will be interested.
Oh, cool, Ryan. Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, I'll contact you offline.
Yep, that sounds perfect, Ryan. Thank you. Yes, it's normally a super rewarding experience. Like by far the most I learn about what we should actually do with Crossplane, which direction we should go, is like the massive number of conversations you can have with users and the community and the ecosystem as a whole at KubeCons. It's really, really rewarding. Well, and Phil, I'm hoping you're gonna want to be at the booth as well too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, nice. Did you? And then there's confusion about if you're already registered as a speaker, which a lot of us are, because we did a great job and got a lot of talks this time. That's not clear if you need to also register as a booth person too. But so just if anyone who does have interest, though, just give me your name and email address, and I'll send it back to the support case I have with them to try to figure it all out. So yeah, I'll include you too, Phil.
Cool. Thanks.
All right. Awesome. Okay, so I think that was the end of that section. Did anybody have other agenda topics before we move on to like PRs and other technical discussion topics? All right, then we can go ahead and move on. Oh, and also Andy, thank you very much for the support you gave to get our demo working for me and Harry's talk. That was super useful, and I appreciate your timely help with that.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Okay, so we don't have any specific PRs listed in the regular PR section, but we do have one that Dan added to the deeper technical discussions. And so this is a completely optional, you know, bonus section of the meeting that maybe, Dan, there are some specific people you want there, but otherwise this is, you know, kind of an off the rails technical conversation that, you know, folks are not required to be at. So if anybody wants to drop off the call now, they're more than welcome to do so. And other than that, Dan, you want to take it away?
Sure. So I just wanted to bring this up because it was an interesting use case that Chris here is working on, adding the ability to do S3 bucket policies. And this would be a new alpha resource. Basically, you know, with any of the policy type resources on AWS, that you pass in basically a raw string that just gets passed on to the AWS SDK and then to the API to create the policy. You know, it's usually JSON or YAML or something like that. What Krish was wanting to do here was have the actual policy itself be structured data So, you know, obviously the JSON or YAML has its own kind of structure that AWS requires for the policy. The advantage of having this structured in the resource would be that you could then have references in your policy itself. So as most folks probably know, with any field, you can have a additional reference and selector field to reference other Kubernetes or other Crossplane types that then, you know, a field gets pulled off of them to populate the value on the object doing the referencing. So if you had a policy that you wanted to apply to an S3 bucket, for instance, or maybe in this case, since S3 bucket is part of the actual spec of the object, it'd be more appropriate to talk about the IAM role you want to give permissions to. You can create an IAM role as an object with Crossplane, but the policy itself, if it's a raw string, you know, you're not obviously not able to reference that IAM policy in there. So there's a couple different ways you could handle that. You could have some sort of templating. So we talked about, well, maybe you have like a, you know, it's basically like a Go template, and then you reference the IAM role in the body, and then we automatically put that in there for you. Or you could actually define the schema of the policy itself. And since you have a schema for that, you could add referencer and selector fields, and then basically, you know, marshal that into the result that you're sending off to AWS. So there is a few kind of like complications with this and the way that AWS structures these policies. Specifically, you can add in conditions that have kind of like custom functions. Basically, the AWS policies are their own templating language that then they do some interpolation in to make things happen. But anyway, we just went kind of back and forth on this because we didn't want to remove the ability to literally just copy paste over your policy as well, because we imagine some folks, you know, would like to be able to do that. And if we have, you know, a bunch of like custom fields in there, then that's not going to work. So we're still kind of working through it. I think maybe for the alpha version, we may just pass in the string like we've done in other places. And it's not going to be as configurable because you can't use references, but it's going to be more what a user would expect, you know, if they're using Terraform or the AWS API directly. So yeah, that's kind of the idea here. The other option, just if folks are kind of like evaluating what they'd want here, is to have basically like a raw policy field and then have the structured schema as well. So you could kind of pick and choose. That's not really like high fidelity with the AWS API. So, you know, there's trade-offs to all of these. But since this is an alpha resource and Krish is going to be using it, it's kind of a nice place to experiment with this. And because we have a really flexible referencing kind of strategy within Crossplane, we're able to do things like this. So while there is kind of like a paradox of choice here, it is nice to see that we can do things like this. So folks, especially folks that use Crossplane, are on this call or see this later, if you have opinions about how this should work, definitely drop them on the PR or on the issue or anything like that.
Yeah, thanks for explaining that, Dan. And I would definitely expect that as folks start to use it, that the real use cases that they're bringing are going to strongly inform, you know, how this should be shaped. I wouldn't be surprised if like the initial implementation, I think, which is pretty much what you were suggesting, it would be just, you know, taking the raw policy and just you know, being able to set that as a field on the CRD and then pass that directly along to Amazon. So there's kind of a principle of least surprise thing going on there, and people, and like I like the potentially the easy on ramp here for people to use this functionality of just copying their existing policy and throwing it into the CRD and having it just work without any sort of manipulation or new concepts they have to learn. So that may be like a easy, acceptable, you know, first implementation of an alpha resource sort of thing to get Krish's first PR in and have useful functionality. So that seems reasonable to me. I assume that longer range, that, you know, being able to do more complicated things and, you know, referencing fields from other objects and stuff like that will be pretty useful, but probably not in the first implementation. Did Krish have, from his particular use case with Quay, did he have like a strong opinion about like how people would be using it in that use case?
Yeah, that was the main motivation really, because right now the S3 bucket is a very old resource. It's probably the oldest one that we have in Crossplane right now that hasn't been refreshed yet, so it needs update. And right now, it behind the scenes creates basically an IAM user and then propagates the connection information to be able to assume that, to be able to use the bucket back from like when we were doing GitLab demos and that sort of thing. And so if you're using that resource, you need to basically be able to, or even if you're not, if you want an IAM role to be created to be able to talk to this bucket, you need to be able to reference that, right? If you want to do this through composition. So if you want to be able to create like a Quay infrastructure instance that creates, you know, Postgres, Redis, S3 bucket, and like this necessary policy and that sort of thing, then you need to be able to configure this policy, right, based on the IAM role that's created. That being said, you can get around this once the S3 bucket is updated. One way you could get around this is either having, you know, the name of the IAM role or the policy surfaced on like the top level object, so you can actually configure that and it flows down right to the managed resources. Or if you're just taking in a raw string, we have some transform functions that you can use in these patches. So you could just pass in just like, you know, the IAM role name, and then that could pass through and create the policy with, you know, basically like a formatting function in there to replace the string with the IAM role name. So there's a couple different ways to get around it, but yeah, this was definitely motivated by the work he's doing with the Quay operator.
Cool, sounds good. Yeah, and then as you mentioned, like anybody who wants to weigh in on this, or you know, especially with their use cases for it too, that'll be really helpful.
Do you think this type of policy document could also then be used in the IAM roles and IAM policy? Because I know we have some issue right now around trying to use like the EKS clusters, like OIDC provider for service accounts, and propagating that info from the cluster the cluster definition to the role. So it seems like this this would work for that too.
Mm-hmm. So are you talking about if you provision an EKS cluster using Crossplane and then propagating that information?
Yeah, to a IAM role, a Crossplane IAM role, because right now you need that OIDC provider information to use that. And
Gotcha.
in the JSON string, it's pretty hard to do that. But it seems like this type of definition would allow that, since it's more concrete.
Yeah, for sure. Is there an issue open for that? That sounds familiar.
Yeah,
I can't remember.
Yeah, there is one. I can put in the chat.
Awesome, that'd be perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, here's the issue that Kellen just shared right here.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, I'll circle back around on this and drop some comments about how the work on the S3 bucket may be related there as well.
Awesome. Thanks for weighing in on that, Kellen. All right. Yes. So then I think that was the last item here. Did anybody have anything else they wanted to bring up before we adjourn for the week? All righty. Sounds good. Cool. So yeah, thanks everybody for joining in this week, and we will find you on Slack. And once again, anybody who's interested in staffing the booth or talking to users and such for Kubecon EU virtual, please let me know, and I'll be happy to include you. Alrighty, thanks everybody.
Well, thanks, Jared. See ya.